In this episode, we're going to look at a very interesting pre-war German single-lens reflex camera. The Pilot 6, made by Camera Werkstätten in Dresden. It's a pretty simple little SLR. The one we've got here today is from 1936, which was the first year that they started making these. And the early ones, you can spot that they only have 3 shutter speeds. There's a 25, a 50, and a 100 printed on there. And the shutter itself is set with this big lever here. It's got a waist level viewfinder. Pops up just like that. They're fairly small. Let me grab another camera for comparison. Here we have a post-war Practiflex 35mm SLR made by the same company after the war. It gives you a decent idea of the size of the Pilot 6 here. Or if we want something more contemporary, here's a 1930s Rolleicord. Get a good idea. These both shoot a 6x6 format on 120. The Pilot 6 was a much cheaper camera though. They came with either choice of f6.3 lens or an f4.5 lens at first, and later on they added an f3.5 lens. The one we've got right here is an f6.3, and it cost in the United States only $16.50 in this form, and it's very interesting. The aperture is like a Waterhouse stop that you'd find on a box camera. You just turn this little dial right here and it clicks each aperture into place. And there's a little dial on top that will show you what aperture you've selected, and we'll take a closer look at that in a moment. So you can see the f-stop there, and when you turn the dial, the selected f-stop shows up in a little window. And it's kind of an odd sequence from f18, f11, f8, f6.3. And you can see from the top here, let's get the hood open here. There's a magnifier. This is pretty useful because it shields out all extra light, which is very important when you've got such a slow lens. Okay, so let's open the back. The back is held closed by this kind of awkward clasp there. Pretty straightforward inside. The fresh film is held in by this clip here, and the top is held in. Pretty normal system. This just snaps into the spool there. I don't think that this is the original advance knob for this camera. I think this is a replacement. I haven't seen this type of knob on any other Pilot 6 camera that I've come across. And we can see the shutter in here. Let's take a closer look at that. If I fire the shutter I've got on B, we'll see how that works. It's very much like the shutter in the later EXA cameras, the 35mm EXA, where the mirror is part of the shutter. Very simple. They're very primitive, actually. If you take them apart, there's not really much inside of them. It's basically just a box camera with a few extra parts thrown in. They're a little bit difficult to use by modern standards because there's no instant return mirror. Obviously, you've got to cock the mirror back down every time you take a picture. There's no preset aperture, so you've got to focus wide open and then click down to whichever f-stop you need to use. And with the very slow lens, the viewing screen for focusing is pretty dim, even with the magnifier in place blocking all the light out. Anyway, let's take the camera out. I'm going to run a roll of film through it and show you the results. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about repairs that I needed to do to this camera to make it work. I hope you enjoyed seeing the photographs. The camera worked pretty much alright. It does look like the lens could use a little cleaning inside, so I'm going to take care of that soon and maybe run another roll through and run another video. I did mention that I needed to repair this camera when I got it. The common problem with these older cameras, especially for some reason the German ones, is that the silvering on the mirrors begins to tarnish or it flakes off or discolors. And I've got the original mirror here from this camera, and it's not the worst I've seen. I've definitely seen much worse mirrors come out of these cameras, but you can see it's kind of discolored and there's little pieces of silvering missing. And when you only have f6.3 to work with your lens, that can make a pretty big difference when it comes to trying to focus that. So a new mirror is definitely needed if you want to actually use this camera. When I took out the old mirror, I found a date on it, and I'll see if we can get that to focus. August 15th, 1936. Pretty interesting. I don't know if that's the day the camera was made, but that seems to be the day the mirror was made. And this particular Pilot 6 does have a very low serial number, and if you've got one and you're wondering where the serial number is, it's hidden on the edge right here. It's normally covered by the film door. So if you want the serial number, that's where to look. I've also got two other Pilot 6 cameras here. This one right here is also relatively early. This is a 36 or 37 model, but this one's got the f4.5 lens, and it's interesting. It's got a difference rather than the Waterhouse stops, or like the disc with the holes drilled in it for apertures. This one's got an actual iris type diaphragm, and you set it with this knob on the front that slides back and forth. That's pretty cool. I've used this camera a lot. This one's also got some more shutter speeds printed. I don't think that these speeds are accurate at all. It claims that you have speeds from 1/20th to 1/150th, and there's no way that any of those speeds are particularly accurate. The shutter mechanism in here doesn't have a clockwork retarding mechanism. There's no variation in the slit width between the mirror and the following piece. So the shutters were never very accurate to begin with. They're probably much less accurate now. In all the rolls I've run through it, I've noticed that there's maybe only about 1 or 2 stops difference between the top shutter speed and the lowest shutter speed. So it was more of just like a marketing gimmick. Print more numbers on there and it seems like the camera's fancier, but really I don't think anything internally is different. They just engraved some more numbers on the dial. Then we've got this Pilot 6 here, and this one's a little bit different. This one's a later one. In 1938, they came out with an entirely different shutter mechanism. It's set with a dial here instead of with this strange lever and button system. They've also incorporated a double exposure prevention. You've got to advance the film before you can wind the shutter up. And if you need to double expose, there's a little button here that you pull up to defeat the double exposure prevention, which allows you to wind the shutter without winding the film. And I'm going to do a video about this camera too, because it's actually pretty different than the earlier Pilot 6 cameras. Anyway, that's going to be a future episode, so I hope you subscribe and come back and watch that video in the future.